Well, we might kick things off with this small but interested crowd in what it is like to be lost. I'm sure with the range of people inside so far, we're going to have some good stories tonight about what it is to be lost. And we've got somewhat of a, shall we say, a person who has been researching being lost for a period of time. He's doing his PhD, Steve Schwartz, and he's in the room as well. And it'll be great to have his perspective on this as we unpack this interesting discussion here inside. I'd just like to throw to David first and foremost for the acknowledgement of country, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Pete. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise the continuing connection to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders both past, present and emerging.
Thanks, David. And just to thank the management team, David, Maddie, Henry, Cherie, for their tireless work and efforts in promoting and supporting this essential community project. And whilst I'm just making announcements, Cherie and her husband Chris this week, if you haven't heard, had a baby daughter, and everyone is doing really well. And big congratulations to Cherie and Chris on their new arrival. Well, Steve, if I don't mind dropping you in the deep end, could you maybe enlighten us to what some of your research has shown you in this area first?
So yeah, thanks for that, Peter. So I wear two hats in life. This is my hobby, going out on SES search operations. And as an academic, that's led me into researching the lived experience of lost people. And then from there, deconstructing the journey between people like yourselves, the interested community, the lost people and the searchers, and trying to find where those connects are hitting and where those connects are missing and how we can build on that. So I've got two objectives with it. One is to put it into academia so that we've got it captured within a scientific literature domain. The other objective, which is more important to me really, is to get feedback out into policy so that when people are putting together lost person prevention strategies, then we can actually have that based on scientific research rather than, you know, best practice. So what I've been doing over the last 2 or 3 weeks is I've been talking to a bunch of people about their personal experiences as lost people, ranging from someone who was lost in the Northern Territory for 3 days overnight, to a person who was stuck in a whiteout blizzard, and just looking for those similarities and differences, and I guess interpreting through the lens of academia and also through my own personal experiences looking for lost people. That's a nutshell.
Thanks for that insight into your research. What I guess the person in the whiteout and the person in the territory, were there marked differences in their response to those two experiences, considering they were in very different environments, or were they similar?
So surprisingly, very, very similar. 4 hours stuck in a whiteout in the snow is not remarkably different lived experience to 3 hours stuck in 3 days stuck in the Northern Territory, which really did surprise me. So what I'm generally finding is there's an element of confusion, an element of planning, an element of fear, how to address that, how to resolve that, and a quest to communicate with the outside world and to navigate themselves out of their problem. Yeah, so absolutely, I was very surprised at the similarities between those two stories, and I'm sure people on the panel here have also had lost person experiences, and I think when you boil it down, they'd be reasonably similar. Would that be correct?
I don't know, panel, is that correct or not?
Yes. Yeah. More often than not, I usually know where I'm. My experience, I guess, as an outdoor educator has been, I'm more likely to have been not so much lost, but more geographically embarrassed by the fact that I'm trying to go from A to B on a map with a group of students or young people. And it's a case of, I know where I should be. I know where I currently am because I'm using either technology or my skills as an experienced facilitator. Using the map technology that I have at my disposal in the current era. But we're not quite, in the location where, it's meant to be a really nice, easy trail. You go here, you go there, but suddenly we're climbing rocks and we're scrambling up a side of a hill and we're going through really thick bush, and that's when the progress of the group slows down significantly. Their enthusiasm for the experience and their confidence in my ability as a guide or as an instructor in this case is, I guess, challenged at that point. Yeah, and eventually you get to the location. You might get there an hour or two later than you experienced or you foresaw that might occur. But it's one of those things of it does certainly challenge you, I think, as a professional to go, at what point did I go off the track that's was supposedly so easy to get to from A to B in this particular instance, and then unpacking that in the time following getting into camp, whether it's just on twilight or actually in the dark, is the challenging thing, because then you have to move on with the rest of the program. So it's dinner and getting people set up with tents and getting people to bed.
What happens within the group dynamics when that happens?
I think there's a lot of pressure for the instructor, for the facilitator, and it definitely creates a lot of tension within the group that's probably not previously there, and it's pretty hard to unpack at the time. But I think you reflect on that, and I know I've done that a lot after the event or after that particular section of the program. If it's a multi-day journey, that I was misplaced. I got to where I needed to get to, but we took a long way to get there, and how you frame that for the group becomes an interesting campfire discussion that evening. Was it a failure of the group or the navigation team or the leaders of the day, or was it a failure of the instructor to pull the young people back, going, hey, nah, you've missed the trailhead or you've missed this critical turn. We need to backtrack. And that's going to take a lot of mental energy, if not physical energy, for the group to actually backtrack. It might be 2 or 3 Ks, and it might be in challenging conditions. It might be quite hot. It might be the end of the day. It might be low on blood sugar. And so it's going to take a lot of management for that group to actually come back to that point where they last knew their exact location and they go again. I think it's an interesting point that we can nowadays, with a limited amount of technology, whether it's just your phone with a GPS tracker or an electronic compass of some variety, or your smartwatch. I've said for a few years my Garmin could actually run a group by itself nowadays, if it could speak, because it tells me exactly where I am all the time. It tells me how far I've gone, shows me my distance, my bearings, all that type of stuff. But you have to come back and balance that against the human factor. Like, it's great to know I'm exactly here, but I know I need to get to there. And how do I motivate the group to join me on that progress? If it's my fault or if it's the group's fault, ultimately, as a facilitator of the experience, I guess that's ultimately my responsibility. So on that? Sorry, go Steve.
So two of the things that I find it really interesting. Two of the things I'm finding is the navigation is an issue. I personally got lost in quite a bad situation in the North Island of New Zealand, snow, all those sorts of things. A 20-year-old that drank too much whiskey the night before a 100k track and left the map behind. So all of a sudden your navigation is out the window. I don't mind sharing that story because I think it's important that people understand that I'm coming from the point of view of, I've been there. But one of the things I'm really finding through my studies as I'm talking to people is this whole group dynamic, and somebody takes charge and says, I'm the boss now. And once that happens, there seems to be almost a heroes and victims type scenario. So I don't know if that happens with the groups you take out, Dave.
Oh, sorry. I don't think so much within the context of a school group that I'm leading it to. Usually, they'll always look to the adult figure to, I guess, rescue the group in that regards. Pete might have a different viewpoint in the tertiary sector, or Mark or Greg, about different experiences they've had, but not for me. It always usually falls the responsibility on the adult or the instructor who's leading the group. Not to rescue the group, but to get them to where they need to go. So, other people's thoughts?
Yeah, I've got a funny story along those lines, Dave. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yep.
Yes, yeah, we can hear you clearly, Greg.
Pete, how you going?
You're good, Greg.
So on a sea kayak trip with a bunch of other outdoors people, and we came into Wonboyne Lake. So around the corner from Cape Howe, I don't know if you guys know it, but once we made it into Wonboyne Lake itself, we were within like a kilometre of the end of the trip, and this was after a few days at sea. But everyone in the group was so keen to keep going that we just missed the actual pull-out altogether and charged up the Wonboyne River for about 6 or 8 Ks. And there was that funny thing in a group of outdoors people where you just devolved the navigation responsibility onto someone else. So everyone just followed everyone else up this river for kilometres and kilometres, and we finally worked out that we'd have to stop and pull out a map, and then went back. So yeah, I think sometimes in a group of like skilled people, you can get that funny situation where everyone just trusts that someone else is looking after it. Amusing at the time.
Yes, great story. I think if you're also the one skilled person with a group of people who perhaps have not as much skill. I was involved in an experience when I was 16, and I won't go into the full details, but we were rock hopping a creek in the Barrington region, and I had taken these 2 mates of mine, and they really had no outdoor experience at all. And we'd been rock hopping for a long time, and we hadn't got anywhere near where we were supposed to go, and we ended up having to spend the night out. And to cut a long story short, it got a write-up in the local paper. You know, boys lost. The local state emergency services came and rescued us. It was a very full-on experience, and my father, who took me into the outdoors first, he credited me with, well, did you learn anything from that? And I learned a lot. So,
yeah, I was just thinking about David's comments about working with the groups. I've been lucky, I guess, and a lot of my work in the outdoors has been with young adults and adult groups, and not schools. So there's less of that looking to the teacher or the adult for help or guidance or rescuing, and in fact, often be in situations where you know the group is getting themselves lost, and you just let them get lost, let it happen, and it provides some wonderful sort of grist for a facilitator mill, you know, and all that stuff about, yes, whose fault, why, you know, how did it happen, what could you have done differently? All those questions make for really good discussion and really good opportunities for learning. And if yourself as the instructor / facilitator are very comfortable where you are, you know exactly what's going on and where you need to be, then it makes it you can really relax into working with the group and working through those learning opportunities, which is great.
I agree with you, Mark. I find that it's very hard to stay mentally together as that person who's the ultimate person in charge, often in that situation.
Yeah.
I struggle with a lot of anxiety particularly when I have been lost with a group. Have others experienced that?
I remember way back in my very early days working in New Zealand with the group and heading to a campsite that I hadn't been to before, had a pretty good idea where it was, and sort of getting quite close to dusk or dark, and we still weren't there. And I remember getting quite stressed about that. In fact, the point where I actually got the group to kind of, okay, we're going to stop here and I'm just going to go off and see what I can find, kind of deal, you know, which looking back on it, it was silly and awful and all sorts of different things I should have done differently, and I learned absolutely. Yeah, there was the stress is there. So one of the reasons I used to tell, I worked at Outbound in New Zealand for quite a long time. Stephen, you might know. But the
Outbound, yeah, sure, I've been there.
Excellent. I would often get staff coming to me. I was a deputy director there for a while, coming to me wanting to change up their bush routes, or go somewhere new, somewhere different they hadn't been before, because they were getting bored with where they were going. And I would say, absolutely not. Because I don't want you to be in a place where you're unsure and unknowing with a group that's completely unsure and unknowing. You need to be completely on top of where you are and on top of your situation, so that you can then help and work with the group you're with to do what they need to do. And for them, it's brand new. They're not bored. They're at the some sort of peak experience going on for them. Your job is to make that peak experience as effective and useful and full of learning as you possibly can.
And it's got a fantastic philosophy, Outbound, hasn't it? It's all about that positive learning from every experience, regardless of whether it might have a little bit of misery in there.
Almost certainly does, in fact. Almost engineered.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think I've always found that alpine environments challenge me as an instructor of led outdoor activities, because I'm not comfortable in the cold. So I've always found that and it's a mantra I learned many years ago. You have to be not just capable of navigation in the environment you're going to, but you've got to be able to deal with the environmental conditions that you experience. So whether it's a really hot January day, or it's July and you're on up in the Cosy area, you've got to be able to deal with all of those environmental aspects in order to still focus on the navigation aspect. And I know if I'm going to a place without a recce, which is pretty common within the industry because of cost and time commitments that staff are poor with, I guess, and organizations to some extent, that I spend a lot of time looking at the maps. I spend a lot of agonizing over it as I'm stepping my way through the day. And I slightly try and do the sneaky thing of I'm not pulling out the GPS anymore. That's a known product. I'm looking at my watch to cross-check what I know or understand where I think I am, just so that I'm not so much. It's one of those dilemmas. I've been thinking, is it me cheating the system or cheating the experience for the young people I'm with by cross-checking that my location is where I am, or is it fine that I'm doing that? But it helps me to manage my stress level, to know that, all right, I know that I'm at this grid reference because my watch tells me that, or my phone if I happen to get the phone out. I don't know, anyone got an opinion on that? Like, is it cheating to go back to a satellite or a GPS system or any sort of other support mechanism, whether it's a spot, to check where you are?
I don't believe so, David. I think that if you're, whether it's a GPS, whether it's a map and compass, whatever it is, you need to make sure that you know where you are and are comfortable enough so that you can then be there for the group you're working with. If you're in that stressed, God, I'm lost kind of state of mind, you're not getting much use to the rest of the group. And if it's a GPS, I haven't had much use with a GPS, but I will consult a map almost constantly. It's in my hand all the time, and I almost know, almost to the meter, perhaps that's exaggeration, where I am. The group might not, and I really don't care what, to some extent where they think they are, so long as I'm very, very much aware. Yeah.
On the alternatives, I in places where I've been and I know exactly where I am, like Kangaroo Valley, I did a lot of programming there with OEG many years ago. I was happy to let young people wander off down the wrong trail for a couple of Ks on a reasonably warm day, because they weren't looking at the map, because they weren't paying attention, and they were cruising, hoping that they'd be rescued. And so I made that a learning experience for them, and they had to trunch back to the right location, and away we went, and we eventually got there. But finding that balance is sometimes quite challenging But I've always found that if you're comfortable where you're at, the location you've been there, you've got experience, and you're comfortable in what's happening within the group, it makes for really good learning outcomes. It might be not seen that way by the young people you're working with or the young adults at the time, but yeah, on reflection later on in the program, it definitely allows more stuff to be drawn out.
Yeah. So I would totally support that. I have an area around Smithfield, our university campus is rainforest. We're lucky enough to be in it. If it's where I know, I navigate by the sun. I know where north is, I know where south is, and I know which direction I'm heading, and that's fine. In contrast, I recently did a 65-kilometre walk from my house to a lake, and I had a GPS, a Garmin GPS with a map overlay on it on my waves, and I was consulting that just continuously as you would with a normal map. And I think it depends on your area knowledge. Another thing that I find too is, so when I'm leading a team in the field, I'm generally leading a rescue team. That's what I do. And I find when I'm starting to stress, my tunnel vision starts coming in, and it gets harder and harder to think what if, rather than, so I can become completely task focused in the wrong direction. And I think that's a point of concern that outdoors has challenging thoughts.
I would just say that I think your role in leading whatever group you're leading is multifaceted. So yes, navigation, which we've discussed quite a lot so far, but it's just one part of it. Like I was leading a group last week, and like a big part of my role was managing, probably more than navigation, was managing emotional situations within the context of the group. The group was way out of their comfort zone on the walk we were on. And although at no stage we were lost, I think that factors another thing into the things we're managing. What do other people think?
I think it just goes back to what we were saying before, that if you are also feeling stressed for whatever reason, whether it's being geographically embarrassed or whatever, you're less than useful to manage the emotional issues you were trying to deal with last week. It's why we do, it's why we train, it's why we study, it's why we learn, it's why we keep doing things, so that we are capable and able to perform in many different situations.
And I think it's that level of personal experience. So I'm quite certain everyone on this panel would be okay if we got stuck out in the bush for a night. Whereas somebody who has no idea what they're coming across can be completely panicked and overcome in 4 hours. And I think probably the one finding I'm finding through my research is knowledge is everything. Knowledge is power. I know we say it all the time, but in the outdoors, knowledge and being comfortable in that environment will stop the panic, which will then stop the tunnel vision, which will help people self-rescue.
Steve, is the current thinking from what would be the current thinking from an SES response about loss prevention? What are they currently training their staff in, or putting out within the public sphere about how to avoid becoming lost? Because whilst we can talk as experienced people, it'd be maybe interesting for the audience, because we get a lot of people who actually watch these videos afterwards, to know what's actually out there at the moment, apart from having to go and buy a $600 Garmin watch.
So I'm probably going to say things that challenge people, and if I do, I hope that's okay, and let's start some conversations. I've spent 18 months studying the academic literature surrounding search and rescue. That's the beginning process of a PhD. The 3 consistent themes that are coming through: more signage, everyone needs a PLB, and some people shouldn't go in the bush. And I disagree with all of those. There's studies which have proven the ineffectiveness of signs. We've got an area up here where unfortunately people routinely drown. There's something like 52 signs that say don't go in the river. And about once every 18 months, we're going to be pulling a body out of that river. So, and there's academic reports to back that up. And I think coming back to your original question, emergency services are really, really good at doing rescues. We're good at finding people, we're good at rescuing people. We're not good at preventing people, because that's not where the focus of the job is. The focus is go in, do the job, get out. And then that work beforehand to stop the trouble happening just hasn't been done. So the next thing that we always hear is take a PLB. I was discussing this with a police officer the other day, and I said, I don't believe that I personally believe PLBs are overrated. Really, really important once you're in trouble, but they won't prevent you from getting in trouble. And there's some anecdotal evidence that says people are starting to rely on a PLB and take themselves into an area they shouldn't have gone in the first place. So hopefully that's challenging people. And the third thing is this argument that some people shouldn't go in the bush. Well, I'm hoping with my brethren here when I say I don't believe that, more people are going to die on the couch than they are from going for a walk in the bush. So my question is to break that down and to look at the steps prior to. So within all disaster management, we break it down. There's the early stage. I'm sitting in Korea and I'm looking up Australia. There's the next stage where I'm going for a hike in Mount Tyson, the next stage where I've fallen off a rock and I'm in trouble, and the next stage where I'm communicating with rescuers. And I want to break that down and learn those steps, because I don't think that information's out there. And this blame the hiker mentality, which is, again, disproven through academia, and the more signs and the take PLBs, I just think that doesn't work. Does that challenge anyone?
People have been going in the mountains for centuries, long before PLBs were invented, and we're getting lost and getting found and coming home safely and all that stuff, So yeah, sure, they're a useful tool, and in this day and age, they can certainly speed things up greatly. But are they necessary? I'm not entirely sure. Do they give people a false sense of security? Almost certainly. If I can just tell a little story which kind of relates, again, going back to Outbound in New Zealand, for those folks that don't know, there's a sailing as part of the program, and as instructor staff members, we get to drive these launches around the Queen Charlotte Sound, sort of tailing or trailing the sailboats. And about 20 years ago, they put in depth finders and GPS units into the launches. Hadn't been there before, and they're fantastic, very clever. You could, plot your route very easily and steam off to where you wanted to go to. Fantastic. About a month in, had a very close call. One launch just about mowed into a headland because it was going from one waypoint to another waypoint, and instructors sort of forgot there was a headland in the middle. If they'd been working off the map and compass, they would have clearly seen that, worked that out. They got complacent, and I think that's part of the challenge with GPSs and with mobile phones and with PLBs, is that people forget that they actually got to use their eyes and use their brains and figure the stuff out as well. It's not really good enough, particularly as professionals taking others into the hills or into the bush, to just rely on these bits of technology, because they can't stop.
I also think, sorry to overwhelm, I think the base skill in the general population is going down, the base bush skills. One of my roles within State Emergency Services is a land search trainer, so we train these people to go and find people once they're lost, obviously in very controlled conditions. Last time I took a bunch of people out, I put them in the bush and said, right, everybody go forward. Probably every third person was tripping over and panicking, and they didn't have those basic bush skills, and I don't know what the solution to that is. I don't know if you guys are finding that as your roles as outdoors educators.
Yeah, I can relate to what saying about the SES though. I was in the SES in Brisbane for about 4 or 5 years, and there's a very small core of people with lots of skill, lots of knowledge, and a large number of people with very little knowledge but very enthusiastic and very keen. So as a leader or a trainer, you've got to really think about how you're going to use those people effectively, and keep them safe and get them home and all that stuff.
Does that reflect into the people that are arriving on your courses and programs?
You have to ask these guys about that. I currently aren't running programs at all, so.
I'll comment on that. I mean, I work with adult learners in, I guess, 2 settings: a university setting and in a not-for-profit, a for-profit organisation that runs Cert 4 training, Cert 4 and deployment training in outdoor recreation for adult learners, basically. And so in that forum, I run into a range of different adults, and I'd say across the spectrum, they come with a range of different training. I have a guy currently in my one of my USC classes. He has done 7 tours of Afghanistan. Like, I can't teach him anything about navigation. So, and then there's people who don't know what a compass is. So it's really full spectrum, and I think the more I see of adult groups, the more it is full spectrum, because I think due to advances in technology, more people are accessing in the outdoors in various formats, and I think that's a really good thing. But I sort of agree with what you're saying, Steve, that there's a bit of a gap between the knowledge people are going into the outdoors with and perhaps what they should be having to go into certain locations.
I'll comment from the perspective of someone who works with students, high school students predominantly. I think there's an attempt at a high school level to teach something about maps, whether that's in a maths or a geography classroom. It really varies when you experience that, though, as a student nowadays. It's not necessarily year 7 or year 8 or year 9, or it may not be at any point that there's actually someone who's going to pull some maps out and teach them that as part of a curriculum or a cross-curriculum activity. So in some cases, having the students use a map and just be able to recognize land features, orient the map, and to be able to go, all right, I know that we're here, we're going to go to this point, and here's the trail. That's almost enough for, you know, a 3 or 4 day program. And I'm actually on program this week, and that's probably what we'll do. We have a compass. I have all my technology, but the compass probably won't get pulled out much beyond orienting the map to make sure that the map is facing north. But we're going to try and use the land features more than anything. I found that's been probably more beneficial than trying to get into the minutiae of talking about grid references or aiming off or using any compass terminology. Certainly bearings is something that doesn't get used a lot, at least in journey-based outdoor. I'm finding several centres try and actually encompass orienteering using bearings and compasses to varying levels of success. Sometimes it's very engaging for the students, and sometimes it's just another activity. Go on, Greg.
No, you're
The
right.
the fun stuff, and this is a comment for Greg because he would have experienced this working in Victoria for many years. The stuff that I love as a facilitator is when you're on a expedition and you're walking through the bush and you're following the trail of pink tape. And the students see the pink tape, and the cluey ones eventually work out that's where the trail is, and so they just follow the pink tape and they don't look at the map again, and that's when misadventure starts to occur, because the pink tape is not always the pink tape that we want to follow. We're looking for the yellow tape, or the more recently put in pink tape. And there's a couple of centres in southeast Queensland that are using that methodology at the moment as well. It's a nice way for me if I'm not familiar with the location, to go, oh yeah, I can see the next bit of tape in the distance. And it's actually fun for the younger students, 7s, 8s, and 9s, to be looking for that stuff. But it's also a bit of I think it can lead to misadventure by it being in the wrong place, or the tape's been taken down by malicious groups previously.
It's a pretty average way to do the job. Follow pink tape.
And in fact, I was speaking to a chap today who became misadventure, and the reason I was speaking to him is he had followed the pink tape and became lost, and now he's part of my study. So, I see you put a question up there about teaching traditional navigation. I personally believe it's everything, and I would like to relate a story. We were on a search looking for somebody and I was quite certain we were heading in the right direction. One of my friends came up to me and said, if we keep traveling in the same direction, how come our shadows turn 90 degrees? And so we'd turned 90 degrees and I hadn't noticed it. And as soon as he pointed out the sun, it's like, wow, you know, traditional navigation, that basic level skill and topographical maps, I think it's everything.
I think a little bit of the traditional navigation is always relying on the program's intentionality and allowing enough time to pull out the maps, pull out the compasses, you know, draw up on a big piece of whiteboard what a good reference is, and trying to explain all these parts. Yeah, and then applying that in an exped moment is challenging, if not sometimes beyond the scope of some of the programs. But it's definitely worth the effort. I see students definitely engaging in it and being able to pick up those skills. But there's definitely a skill set for the facilitator to be able to make that engaging and important enough in the students' minds that they don't need to follow the pink tape in order to get from A to B.
I think too that basic traditional navigation, the idea of being aware of where you are, being aware of what's around you, being aware of where the sun is good basic life skill stuff too, you know. So why not teach it? Why not use it? Maybe use it for that reason as well, you know. And perhaps you relate it back, you know, justifying why you're teaching basic navigation to, you know, it's the way you manage the way through your own life, you know.
I tend to about once a year get people with a sandpit and a topographical map and ask them to build a 3D model of what that topographical landscape looks like. And that's a really effective way to get those concepts across easily and quickly.
Yep. Yeah, there's a few little tricks like that, eh? It's good.
My favorite is doing the old here's the ridge line, and here's the valley or the saddle, and then getting the Sharpies out, and everybody draws contour lines on their hands. So at the end of the session, everyone's got lots and lots of lines on their hands, and it looks like we've made a big mess. But it's a great way to actually teach, topology and map to land and land the map concepts. That's the one I like to use it quite a bit. Anyone got any other good ideas or tips?
I will steal that.
It completely does work. It really does. You know, you put, you use this is your high point here, and then you do your circle, and then and you can really make them see the U's and the V's for the different shapes of, you know, what's a valley and what's a spur line. And it does take everyone to have a Sharpie and everyone be prepared to draw on their hands. But again, I work with young people and they tend to be happy to do that type of stuff, even if it's just for the sake of doing something and not listening to me for a bit.
And on a similar vein, the idea of the hand, you know, if my fingers are all ridges, they're all heading up to the same place. So it doesn't really matter which ridge you go up. But as soon as you start to come down, you've got to be well and truly onto it, because you could end up being a very long way away from where it'll be very easier. And again, that's a very simple little model to use.
Yeah, that's a nice one. I like that one. I hadn't seen that before.
Oh, there you go. Feel free to use it, Pete. It's on me.
Thanks.
I'll tell you a little story. Just I'm going to have to go in a minute. But years ago, when I was about 12, I think, my grandparents lived on Stewart Island, which is the little island, the Tasmania of New Zealand, right at the bottom. And we had a holiday house on one hill, and they had their house on top of another hill, bush-filled valley between us. And my brothers and I thought we'd go to Grandma's house one day, so we headed off down to the bush. And then somewhere down there, we found this clearing. So I thought, oh, let's climb a tree and, you know, see where we're going. And I got up this tree and I said, oh, there's Grandma's house. We're off. Off we went. And a while later, we came to a clearing. I thought, I'll just climb another tree and check out where Grandma's house is. And I was halfway up this tree and I looked across, and there about 10 feet away was the tree I climbed first time. That we'd done the complete 360, come right back to where we were before. That was a learning moment as a 12-year-old.
Did you get to Grandma's house
We
eventually?
did get to Grandma's house. I think we actually headed down the valley from the clearing and then found the road eventually and took the easy way up.
Yes.
We did get there, yes.
Yes. Well, have we exhausted being lost? Does anyone else have any further comments on being lost, or stories about being lost, or ways that they've coped with being lost in the past or will cope with being lost in the future?
I actually quite enjoy sort of losing myself, allowing myself not to get lost as in I got no idea at all, but, you know, sort of casually bush, you know, not quite sure exactly where you are, and it doesn't really matter because, you know, eventually you get to come to somewhere and it's okay, you know, and that's good fun. And then sort of working it out from there. But I was going to ask Steve, the work you're doing, the research you're doing, that will end up in some kind of report, paper, or something that might be available to us or to others?
Absolutely. So, well, there'll be a PhD thesis at the end of it, which I'm not sure if that'll be particularly interesting for somebody outside of that program to read. But so far to date, I've published one paper in the Australian Institute of Emergency Services Journal. I'm presenting at the Disaster Emergency Management Conference that was supposed to be last week, but now it's in September. I've got a paper in peer review at the moment with the Australian Journal of Emergency Management, and there'll be another 2 or 3 papers that come through. And absolutely, those articles are targeted to people like yourselves, as much as there's the academic requirement that they fit within the world of academia. But I don't want it to be so academic that it has no value in the real world application either. So I'm really trying to take the approach of top down and bottom up with what we're finding. I don't want it to just sit there and never land. You know, that's just silly. So, absolutely. And as that goes, I'd certainly like to find a way to facilitate distribution of those articles. And I think
I'm sure Pete and David would be happy to find ways through inside the Outhaus, but also through Outdoors Queensland. We'd be happy to find ways to help distribute that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, could you put a link potentially in the chat to the articles that you were talking about, Steve?
Sure, I'll put my email address in there too. So the first part of this study is I'm talking to people that have been lost and just understanding what it's all about. Interesting, you're saying that, you know, you enjoy being casually bushed. The lady who was lost for 3 days in the Northern Territory was telling me about the highlights of her trip. You know, she knew she was in trouble, but and her words were that even though she was in trouble, there was no way she wasn't going to enjoy being in the outdoors for 3 days.
Good on her.
As opposed to the guy that didn't know what he was doing, that was panicking after 4 hours, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking for people that are prepared to share those stories, completely non-judgmental. I don't care how, why, or what. I'm just really interested in learning their stories. The second part, which is something that I'm really keen to work with you guys on, is to talk to people like yourselves and say, what's it like to have a group that you're in charge of lost? What's it like to be looking for people that are lost? Where do you think your steps are within the journey? If we deconstruct that journey from I'm sitting in my cozy little home, wherever that may be, to now I'm sitting at the bottom of a hill wishing I wasn't here, how would you understand that journey and how would you relate to that journey, as well as speaking to some rescuers and some more people that have been lost? So I'm certainly looking for more participants for this topic.
So in that case, we could probably help you find or get in contact with people that you would want to talk to. We put out a newsletter once a month. Pete and Dave both know about that, and happy to put an article or something in there about what you're looking for. If you send me, and I'll put my email address in the chat in a second, details about what you're looking for, maybe a little article, something we can share. Saying what you want, I can get that out to people easily.
That'd be fantastic. I've got an advertisement that was approved. So part of the process is I had to go through an ethics committee approval process to make sure I wasn't doing anything too nefarious towards people. Obviously, we're dealing with traumatized people. So I'll send you through the information that was approved through the ethics, and then perhaps we can discuss from there.
Sure.
And I really appreciate anything that I can, two-way communication between your forum and this study. You know, I'm just the vehicle for the study. You know, I don't see it as about me. I see it as about getting the knowledge and putting it out there again.
It sounds like a very interesting project. I'm excited to be part of it.
I just put my my details up there in the chat, but I realised I missed a space between Outdoors Queensland and the email address, which is the operations@Outdoors Queensland. So.
No worries. I'll leave that. Thank you for that, Mark.
No worries. I got a bit lost, you see.
Yes.
And I've got to say, growing up in Stewart Island, I'm jealous.
Yeah, I didn't actually grow up there. We had all our summer holidays there. That was kind of special.
Yeah. I've spent a fair amount of time there.
Yeah, my family my dad's family was from there.
I haven't spent a fair amount of time, but I've been there, and it's a beautiful place.
It is.
Very much like North Queensland, but cold.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I'm a little bit allergic to the cold.
Yeah. No, sounds not too bothered. All right, gentlemen, listen, thank you very much. I'm going to shoot off now.
Hey, Mark, thanks for coming and thanks for your input. Some great stories, and thanks again.
My pleasure. And we'll see you all again at some point, I'm sure. Okay.
Sure we will.
Cheers. Yeah.
Bye. And then there was 4 of us.
Last point I was going to mention, it was many years ago, and it was very earlier in my career. I was involved in a search and rescue effort for a colleague who'd gotten lost at a local mountain, and it was an amazing experience in terms of I don't think I got very far into the search before the group was found, and they implemented a plan, and the SES got involved, and there was police and all sorts of stuff many years ago. And yeah, I reflected, I guess, after that point, and haven't really gone back to it. But yeah, there was a part of me that had gone and done some search and rescue training through the TAFE vet system, which was part of the requirement at that point to get a diploma or even a Cert 4. I'm not sure if that's still a requirement, but we used to have to climb this horrendous mountain in the middle of the night to find an old plane wreck as part of our scenario to actually do a search and rescue. And yeah, it was very challenging, very hard training to do, and it's something I've never really utilized, but it's nice to have had that in the background of my training and my career. But thankfully, touch wood, I've never had to use it for myself or in a serious manner to go and find anyone else who I might be responsible for.
I think it's scary how common a lost person scenario is in the bush, and the fatality rate is not good. I must have been on around 30 to 40 different search operations, and certainly there's been a fairly high mortality rate on those. So it's always nice to find somebody that's still on this side.
Yeah, I understand. The fatality rate is really tragic, but I was reading a book published by a Kiwi, and he was talking around survival stories. And I can't, to the life of me, remember the name of the book, but similar type of thing. He was interviewing people who had survived time in the outdoors who had been lost. And I think one of the things he definitely said was people who survived more seem to not move as much. People who, did you find anything about that, Steve? And then we might close it up. Sure.
So I haven't really gone into that so much, and that may or may not come out. But the background literature, as I said, did extensive work through the academic literature. Search and rescue operations are based on 2 things. They're based on lost person behaviour. If we split into demographics, and we've got statistical behaviours of an elderly person or a hiker or a hunter or whatever, and on location probabilities. And so we just get an ever-increasing circle. In fact, I can send you a link, and I possibly will. So if we have a 50% likelihood of finding somebody within a 1 kilometre radius of their last known point, it's certainly easier than when we're at to a 95% likelihood of finding them within 17 kilometres of the last known point, because it's just not feasible to just scour 17 kilometres of rugged bushland within the space of time frame for survival, which is the other issue. And there's a lot of science behind that, which I think I won't quote the name of the gentleman that runs it, but there's a lot of research around time frame for survival here in Australia. But my issue, that picture I showed you at the start, this young lady here, it's a big story. She was a Korean lady from, she was in Tully on holiday. She'd gone up to the top of a hill, put her selfie stick out to take a photo, and selfies cause a lot of fatalities in the outdoors. I don't know if you're aware of that. Yeah, people stand on a rock or a waterfall and go to take a photo, and then they fall off the rock or the waterfall, and they've got a big problem going on. We were briefed that she was definitely, we weren't going to be finding her alive. We found her alive after 6 days. Reason for that was because she'd fallen and she'd been terrified of where she was. She was only 1 kilometre from town, so she was close to town. But she had fallen on top of a waterfall, so she had the water to drink. And in fact, we located her because somebody had heard her screaming the night that she disappeared. And they came into the search space where we were working. There's 50 odd members of us on the search team. And they said, "Oh, I think I heard somebody yelling on Friday night. Are you interested in knowing about that?" So because she hadn't moved, we found it.
Wow. There you go. Wow. Well, thank you very much for a very, very interactive and wonderful discussion on people being lost, although we got onto navigation and managing groups in the outdoors and a range of different things. I'd like to thank Steve Schwartz personally from JCU for coming in and sharing his wisdom and his research in this area, and we'll no doubt be in touch with in the future as we could potentially participate in your study, is what I was thinking, at least in the short term. Thanks very much to the management team. If anyone else has anything to say, otherwise this is Pete Smith signing off for yet another Outhaus. Good night.